When I turned 58, I threw a party for the family. No one came. That same day, my daughter-in-law posted photos of everyone on a cruise. I just smiled. When they came back, I handed her a DNA test that made her go pale. My name is Carl Martinez, and I'm 58 years old. I spent 3 weeks planning my 58th birthday party. 3 weeks choosing the perfect menu, decorating the garage with streamers, and calling everyone to confirm they'd be there. I even bought a new shirt, the kind my late wife Maria always said made me look distinguished. The table was set for 7, place cards written in my best handwriting. Danny Martinez, my son, Sharon Taylor, his wife, little Eddie Martinez, who just turned 7, sweet Nancy Martinez, who's 5, my sister Beverly Johnson, her husband Gary Foster, and myself at the head of the table. By 6:30, no one had arrived. I checked my phone 3 times thinking maybe I'd gotten the time wrong, but there it was in my calendar. Birthday dinner 6 p.m. I'd sent reminders to everyone just 2 days before. At 7:00, I called Danny straight to voicemail, then Sharon's phone. Same thing. Beverly didn't answer either, which was strange because she always picks up on the second ring. I stood in my garage looking at the untouched plates. The candles I'd lit an hour ago were burning down to stumps. The barbecue was getting cold. The chocolate cake I'd spent all morning making sat perfect and uncut on the kitchen counter. Maybe there was traffic, maybe something came up at the last minute. These things happen, I told myself, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. By 8:00, I knew they weren't coming. I sat down heavily in my chair, staring at the empty seats around me. This wasn't just lateness, this was something else entirely. The silence in my house felt hollow, like the house itself was holding its breath. That's when I made the mistake of checking Facebook. There at the top of my feed was a photo that made my blood freeze, Sharon radiant in a flowing white dress. Her arm around Danny, who was grinning wider than I'd seen in months. Behind them, the deep blue of the ocean stretched endlessly. The caption read, "Living our best life on the Mediterranean. So grateful for this amazing family getaway." I scrolled down. More photos. Eddie and Nancy building sand castles on a pristine beach. Beverly and Gary sharing cocktails at what looked like an elegant ship's bar. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. The timestamp showed the photos were posted just an hour ago while I was sitting here waiting for them. They were thousands of miles away, toasting with champagne and laughing at some sunset dinner on a cruise ship. They'd planned this, all of them. Sharon had organized a family vacation that deliberately excluded me, scheduled it for my birthday, and somehow convinced everyone to go along with it. Even Beverly, my own sister, who'd helped me pick out decorations for this party just last week, I stared at that photo until my eyes burned. Sharon's smile looked especially bright, almost triumphant. She was standing exactly where I should have been, at the center of my family, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me most. My phone buzzed. A text from Danny. "Sorry, Dad. Forgot to mention we'd be out of town this week." Sharon booked a surprise trip. "Happy birthday, though. Forgot to mention." As if a Mediterranean cruise was something you just casually forgot to tell your father about. As if booking it on my birthday was pure coincidence. I set the phone down carefully, afraid I might throw it against the wall if I held it any longer. The barbecue was definitely cold now. I walked to the kitchen and turned off the grill. My movements felt mechanical and strange. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, observing this sad man in his new shirt. Cleaning up the dinner no one came to eat. I wrapped the cake in plastic and put it in the refrigerator. Blew out what remained of the candles. Started loading the good plates back into the cabinet, each one clicking against the others with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet house. Sharon had won something tonight, though I wasn't entirely sure what game we'd been playing. All I knew was that for the first time in my 58 years, I felt truly invisible, not just overlooked or forgotten, but erased. As I turned off the garage lights, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked smaller, somehow, diminished. The man staring back at me had spent decades being the family backbone, the one who fixed everyone's problems and remembered everyone's birthdays, the one who always put family first, and they'd all chosen to spend my birthday pretending I didn't exist. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step heavier than the last. Tomorrow, I'd have to face the aftermath. The fake apologies, the excuses about miscommunication, Sharon's sweet voice explaining how the trip was booked months ago and there was nothing they could do. But tonight, I just needed to sit with this pain, to really feel it. Because something told me this wasn't just about a missed birthday party. This was about something much bigger and much more deliberate than I'd ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through every family gathering from the past 5 years. The birthday that wasn't just forgotten, it was deliberately sabotaged, and as the hours crept by, other memories started surfacing, each one more unsettling than the last: Eddie's 4th birthday party. I'd been so excited to see him blow out his candles, but when I arrived at the venue, Sharon met me at the door with that apologetic smile she'd perfected. "Oh, Carl, didn't Danny tell you? We had to move the party to tomorrow. Little emergency came up, but I could hear children laughing inside. Could see balloons through the window. When I called Danny later, he seemed genuinely confused. Tomorrow? No, Dad. The party's definitely today." Sharon must have mixed up the dates. Nancy's first day of kindergarten. I'd asked Sharon 3 times what time they were dropping her off so I could be there with my camera. "Oh, we're doing it super early," she'd said, like 7 a.m. Probably too early for you. When I showed up anyway, the teacher told me Nancy had been there since the normal time, 8:30. I'd missed her walking into her classroom, missed her nervous little wave goodbye to Danny. Last Christmas, Sharon had called me 2 days before, her voice tight with false concern. "Carl, I hate to do this, but Danny's been feeling really overwhelmed with work stress. He asked if we could keep Christmas dinner small this year, just immediate family. I'd spent Christmas alone, reheating leftovers and watching old movies." Later, I found out from Beverly that they'd had a huge celebration. She'd seen the photos on Instagram. 20 people, including Danny's high school friends and several neighbors. Everyone except me. Each memory was like a puzzle piece clicking into place, forming a picture I'd been too blind to see. This wasn't a pattern of miscommunication or innocent scheduling conflicts. This was systematic, calculated. I got up and made coffee as the sun rose, my hands still trembling from exhaustion and something else, a growing sense of dread. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through Sharon's social media posts from the past year, really looking at them for the first time. There she was at Eddie's school play, sitting in the front row next to Danny. I'd asked about that play specifically, and she'd told me it was canceled due to a flu outbreak. There she was at Nancy's dance recital. The one Sharon said was just a practice session, nothing special, photo after photo of family moments I'd been excluded from. Each one tagged with captions about precious family memories and blessed to have these people in my life. The worst part was how natural it all looked. Sharon's arm around Danny, the children clustered close to their parents, everyone smiling like they belonged together, like they were complete without me. I set the phone down and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden I'd planted when Danny was a boy. He used to help me weed these flower beds, his small hands careful with the delicate stems. When had I lost him? When had he stopped seeing me as essential to his happiness? The answer came with startling clarity. When Sharon entered our lives. Before her, Danny called me twice a week. We had standing dinner dates every other Sunday. He'd ask my advice about work problems, share stories about his day. He was my son, my friend, my connection to a future I'd helped create. Sharon changed that gradually, so slowly I didn't notice until it was too late. First, the Sunday dinners became monthly. Sharon's been planning these elaborate meals, Danny explained. She loves having me all to herself on weekends. Then the phone calls dwindled to obligation check-ins on holidays. "Sorry, Dad, can't talk long." Sharon's got us scheduled pretty tight today. She never said anything directly against me. That would have been too obvious, too easily countered. Instead, she operated in the spaces between words and the silences that followed her suggestions. "Your dad seems tired lately. Maybe we shouldn't burden him with the kids this weekend. I saw your dad at the grocery store yesterday. He looked a little confused about something. Do you think he's doing okay living alone?" Subtle implications that I was becoming a burden, a concern, someone who needed managing rather than including. I thought about the way she hugged me at family gatherings, always a beat too long, her hand rubbing my back like I was a fragile elderly relative who needed comforting rather than an equal member of the family. The way she'd interrupt when I was talking to the children, redirecting their attention to something else. "Grandpa Carl's had a long day, sweeties. Why don't you show Daddy your new toy instead?" And Danny, my hardworking, trusting son, had absorbed it all without question. He'd started looking at me the way Sharon did, with a mixture of affection and pity, like I was something precious but increasingly irrelevant. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Danny's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, Dad." His voice was cheerful, relaxed in a way that made my chest ache. "Just wanted to call and say happy belated birthday. Sorry we missed it, but this trip has been incredible." Sharon really outdid herself with the planning. I gripped the phone tighter. Yes, I saw the photos. Oh, good. Sharon's been posting like crazy. The kids are having such a blast. Eddie learned to snorkel yesterday, and Nancy made friends with this little girl from Boston. You would have loved seeing them, would I? Because from where I sat, it seemed like no one had even noticed I wasn't there. The trip was very last minute. I said carefully, I know. Right? Sharon found this amazing deal and just went for it. She's always been spontaneous like that. One of the things I love about her, spontaneous. That's what he called deliberately booking a cruise on his father's birthday. Danny, I started, then stopped. What could I say that his wife was manipulating him? That she'd spent years systematically excluding me from his life. He'd think I was jealous, bitter, unable to accept that he'd grown up and moved on. Maybe I was all those things, but I was also right. Everything okay, Dad? You sound off. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of all those lost moments, all those times I'd been edited out of my own family story. I'm fine, son. Just tired. Well, get some rest. We'll be back next week, and I promise we'll plan something special to make up for missing your birthday. Another promise from Danny that Sharon would find a way to break. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the light change as morning moved toward afternoon. I thought about the years ahead. More birthdays spent alone, more grandchildren's milestones missed, more family photos where my absence was so complete it was like I'd never existed at all. For the first time since Maria died 5 years ago, I felt truly orphaned, not by death this time, but by something arguably worse. By the deliberate, methodical erasure of my place in the only family I had left. But as the anger built in my chest, hot and bright, I realized something else. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. If Sharon wanted to play games, she'd pick the wrong opponent. I'd raise Danny when his mother got sick. I'd worked double shifts at the factory to put him through community college, sacrificed my own comfort to ensure he had every opportunity. I'd earned my place in this family, and I wasn't giving it up without a fight. I just needed to figure out what I was really fighting against. It was Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after my abandoned birthday party, when the doorbell rang. I was still in my robe, nursing my second cup of coffee and staring at the stack of thank you cards I'd bought for a celebration that never happened. The sound startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and honestly, unexpected visitors had become rare in my carefully managed social isolation. Through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s maybe, with dark hair and worry lines etched deep around his eyes. He was well-dressed but rumpled like he'd been traveling. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, and he kept glancing around nervously as if he wasn't sure he should be there. I almost didn't answer. After the cruise incident, I wasn't in the mood for solicitors or missionaries or whatever the stranger might want, but something about his posture, the way he seemed to be gathering courage just to stand on my porch, made me curious. Can I help you? I called through the door. Mr. Martinez? His voice was careful, hesitant. Carl Martinez, Danny's father. My chest tightened. How did this stranger know my son's name? Who's asking? He was quiet for a moment, then said something that made my blood run cold. My name is Tony Williams. I need to talk to you about Sharon. I opened the door slowly, keeping the chain latched. What about Sharon? Tony Williams looked even more nervous up close. His hands were trembling slightly, and there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. This is going to sound crazy, Mr. Martinez, but I think my son might be living in your son's house. The chain felt suddenly heavy in my hands.
What are you talking about?
Eddie, he said, and the name hit me like a physical blow. The little boy, 7 years old, brown hair, has a scar on his chin from falling off his bike when he was 4. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Eddie did have a scar on his chin. Danny had told me about the bike accident, how scared they'd all been rushing him to the emergency room. But how would this stranger know that? I think you'd better come in, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Tony Williams sat on my couch like he might bolt at any second. I offered him coffee, but he shook his head. His hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. I don't know where to start, he said. This is going to sound insane. Try me. I've had a very strange week. He took a shaky breath. Sharon and I, we were together for 2 years. This was before she met your son, before she got married. We lived together, talked about marriage, the whole thing, and then she got pregnant. My coffee cup suddenly felt too heavy. I set it down carefully, afraid I might drop it. I was so happy, Tony continued, his voice thick with old pain. I wanted to marry her immediately, start planning our life together. But Sharon, she kept putting me off, said she needed time to think, wasn't ready for such a big step. Then one day I came home from work and she was gone, just gone, all her stuff, everything. Like she'd never lived there at all. Did you look for her? Of course I did, for months. Filed a missing person report, hired a private investigator, posted on every social media platform I could think of, nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. He rubbed his face with both hands. The investigator finally told me to give up, said, "Some people just don't want to be found." I was starting to feel sick. What does this have to do with Eddie? A month ago, I was at a conference in Sacramento just walking around downtown during lunch, and I saw them, Sharon and a little boy who looked exactly like me at that age. Same eyes, same chin, even the same way of tilting his head when he's concentrating. I followed them for 3 blocks, Mr. Martinez. I watched that little boy and I knew he was mine. The room felt like it was spinning. You're saying Eddie is your son? I'm saying I think he is. Sharon was about 2 months pregnant when she left me. If she carried the baby to term, he'd be exactly Eddie's age now. Tony reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Look at this. He showed me a photo of himself as a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The resemblance to Eddie was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw, even the same slight gap between his front teeth that Eddie was always trying to hide when he smiled. My hands were shaking now. This could be a coincidence. Lots of children look alike. That's what I told myself at first. But then I started digging. Tony's voice got harder, more determined. I hired a private investigator. Sharon Taylor. That's not even her real name, by the way. Her real name is Brenda Clark. And she's done this before. Done what before? Disappeared when things got complicated. Left men when they started asking too many questions. The investigator found 2 other guys, Mr. Martinez, 2 other men who had relationships with her that ended the same way. Suddenly, completely, like she'd never existed. Tony leaned forward, his eyes intense. One of them thinks she might have been pregnant when she left him too. I felt like I was drowning. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because I've been watching from a distance for the past month, trying to figure out what to do, trying to decide if I had the right to disrupt a child's life based on suspicions and coincidences. His voice cracked. But then I saw the photos from your cruise, the happy family vacation, everyone smiling and laughing, and I realized something that made me sick. What? You weren't in any of the photos. I looked through all of Sharon's social media, Mr. Martinez. Hundreds of pictures of family gatherings, birthday parties, holidays. Eddie and Nancy are in all of them. Your son Danny is in most of them. But you're barely there, like you're being written out of your own family story. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all those missed events, all those last-minute changes and convenient miscommunications. All those times I'd felt like an outsider looking in at my own family. I started thinking about my own experience with Sharon. Tony continued, how she isolated me from my friends and family near the end, how she made me feel like I was the problem, like I was too demanding, too clingy, how she convinced me that the people who cared about me didn't really understand our relationship. She's doing the same thing to Danny, I whispered. I think so. And I think she's doing it to you too. Which means if Eddie really is my son, he's not the only victim here. You are too. Tony reached into his coat again and pulled out a manila envelope. This is why I'm here, Mr. Martinez. Why I finally worked up the courage to knock on your door. What is it? DNA test results. I managed to get a sample of Eddie's hair from the barber shop where Sharon takes him. Had it tested against my own DNA. His hands were shaking as he handed me the envelope. I got the results yesterday. I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Inside was information that could destroy my family or save it, and I had no way of knowing which before you opened that, Tony said quietly. I need you to know something else. I don't want to take Eddie away from the only father he's ever known. I don't want to traumatize him or disrupt his life. But I can't stand by and watch Sharon manipulate and lie to the people who love him, including you. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me make sure he's protected from her, from whatever game she's been playing with all of us. Tony's voice was steady now, resolved. Because if she's lied about this, Mr. Martinez, what else has she lied about? And who else is she going to hurt? I looked at the envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of whatever truth was inside. Outside, a car door slammed and I heard children laughing as they walked past my house. Normal sounds of a normal afternoon in a normal neighborhood where mothers didn't steal children and grandfathers didn't get erased from family photos. But my life hadn't been normal for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Mr. Martinez, Tony's voice was gentle now, almost kind. Are you ready to know the truth? I thought about Eddie's sweet face, about the way he used to run to me with his arms outstretched before Sharon started discouraging those displays of affection. I thought about Nancy, who barely knew me anymore because I'd been excluded from so much of her life. I thought about Danny, my son who'd been slowly poisoned against his own father. I thought about my empty birthday party and all those family photos where I didn't exist. Yes, I said, and opened the envelope. The DNA results were written in clinical, unforgiving language. 99.7% probability of paternity. The numbers swam before my eyes as I read them again and again, hoping somehow they'd change, hoping this was all an elaborate mistake or cruel joke. Eddie wasn't Danny's son. My grandson, the little boy I'd watched take his first steps, helped teach to tie his shoes, read bedtime stories to when he was small enough to curl up in my lap. He wasn't my blood at all, and Danny, my devoted son who'd named Eddie after his grandfather, had no idea he'd been raising another man's child. "I'm sorry," Tony said quietly. He was still sitting on my couch, watching my face as I processed the information. "I know this must be devastating." I set the papers down with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "How long have you known for certain?" "Since yesterday, but I've suspected for the past month." He pulled out his phone again and showed me more photos, surveillance pictures he'd obviously taken from a distance. Eddie playing at a park, Eddie walking into a school building, Eddie riding a bike down what looked like my neighborhood street. I've been following them sometimes, I know how that sounds. But I had to be sure. "You've been watching my family. I've been watching my son." Tony corrected, his voice firm but not hostile, and trying to understand what kind of woman could steal a child and build an entire life around that lie. The anger came then, hot and overwhelming. Not at Tony. He was as much a victim as the rest of us. But at Sharon, at the magnitude of her deception, the cruelty of it. She hadn't just lied about Eddie's parentage. She'd built her entire marriage on that lie, used an innocent child as the foundation for a life she had no right to claim. "She trapped Danny," I said, the words coming out harsh and bitter. "She got pregnant with another man's baby and used it to secure a marriage to my son." "It looks that way." Tony's expression was grim. "The timeline fits perfectly. She left me when she was about 2 months along, just starting to show. If she moved fast, found someone quickly, she could have convinced him the baby was premature or just small." I thought back to Eddie's birth, how excited Danny had been when he called to tell me Sharon was in labor. He came 3 weeks early, I remembered. Danny was worried about complications, but the doctor said everything was fine, because everything was fine. Eddie wasn't premature. He was exactly on schedule for Tony's timeline, not Danny's. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Sharon's whirlwind romance with my son, the quick engagement, the wedding that happened barely 6 months after they met. I'd thought it was romantic at the time. True love conquering all. Now I realized it was something much more calculated. She needed a father for Eddie before he was born, I said. Someone stable, someone who wouldn't question the timing too closely. Someone trusting, Tony added. Someone who wouldn't demand a paternity test because the thought would never occur to him. That was Danny, exactly. My son had always been honest to a fault, incapable of the kind of deception that would make him suspicious of others. He took people at face value, believed what they told him. It was one of his best qualities, and Sharon had weaponized it against him. "There's more," Tony said, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. The investigator I hired found out some other things about Sharon, things that might explain why she's been pushing you out of the picture. "What things?" Tony pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were photographs, documents, what looked like copies of official records. Her real name is Brenda Clark. She's 32, not 29 like she told your son. She grew up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18. No family, no real connections anywhere. I studied a photograph that looked like it came from a high school yearbook. The face was definitely Sharon, but younger, harder somehow. Her hair was different, darker, and there was something in her eyes that I'd never seen in the woman who married my son. A kind of desperate hunger. "She's been married before," Tony continued. "Twice. Once to a man named Rick Peterson in Nevada, once to someone called Steve Coleman in Oregon. Both marriages ended in divorce within 2 years, both times with her getting significant alimony settlements. She's done this before," I whispered. "The pattern's always the same. She meets a man with money or stability, moves fast to lock him down, then systematically isolates him from his support system. Friends, family, anyone who might see through her act or ask uncomfortable questions." I thought about how Danny's old friends from the factory had gradually stopped coming around after he married Sharon, how he drifted away from his work colleagues. how he rarely talked about his job anymore, except to mention how stressful it was. How he'd become increasingly dependent on Sharon for social connections, for emotional support, for everything. She's been isolating him, I said. And you, because you're the biggest threat to her control. Fathers see things other people miss. They ask questions. They remember details from before she came along. Tony leaned forward, his expression intense. She needed you out of the picture, Mr. Martinez. Not just distant, completely erased. That's why the birthday party's sabotage. That's why all the missed events and miscommunications. She's been systematically training your family to function without you. The cruelty of it took my breath away, but why? If she already had Danny, if he believed Eddie was his son, why go to such lengths to exclude me? Because you're a witness to the timeline. You remember when they met, when she got pregnant, when Eddie was born. If you'd ever started asking questions, comparing dates, you might have figured out the truth. Tony's voice was quiet but certain. She needed you to become irrelevant before you became dangerous. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where I could see the street where Eddie had learned to ride his bike. The little boy I'd cheered for, bandaged his scraped knees, celebrated every milestone with. He was still the same child, still sweet and funny and bright. But everything about his place in our family was a lie. What about Nancy? I asked, dreading the answer. As far as I can tell, Nancy really is Danny's daughter. Born 2 years after Eddie during a time when Sharon and your son were definitely together, but Mr. Martinez, Tony hesitated. What? Nancy's birth might have been calculated too. A way to make sure Danny never questioned Eddie's parentage. If Sharon could give him a biological child, he'd be less likely to doubt that Eddie was his too, and it would cement their relationship even further. I felt sick. Everything about my son's marriage, his family, his life for the past 7 years had been orchestrated by a woman who saw him not as a person to love, but as a resource to exploit. And she'd used children, innocent children, as tools in her manipulation. Eddie doesn't know, does he? I asked. Of course not. He's 7 years old. As far as he's concerned, Danny is his father and always has been, and Nancy, she doesn't know either. She just thinks she has a big brother who looks different from her. Kids don't question these things, but adults did, or they should, and I was starting to understand why Sharon had worked so hard to make me irrelevant. A grandfather who spent time with his grandchildren, who was really present in their lives, might eventually notice that Eddie looked nothing like his supposed father. Might start asking questions about family resemblances, about genetic traits that didn't add up. Tony, I said slowly, why did you decide to tell me this now? You could have just demanded a paternity test, gone through the courts, tried to get custody. Why involve me? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Because I realized something when I saw those cruise photos. Sharon isn't just destroying my relationship with my son. She's destroying yours too. And if we don't stop her, she's going to keep doing it to other people. What do you mean? She's already starting to pull back from Danny's friends, from his work colleagues, making him more and more dependent on her for everything. And she's teaching the kids to see him as the only parent who really matters. Eddie barely talks about you anymore when I've watched them at the park. It's like she's erasing you from his memory. The truth of that hit me hard. I thought about how different Eddie had become in recent months. How he'd stopped running to hug me when I visited. How he'd started looking to Sharon for permission before talking to me. I thought he was just growing up, becoming more independent, but maybe it was something else entirely. She's going to discard Danny eventually. Tony continued. Just like she discarded me, just like she discarded her previous husbands. But first, she's going to make sure he has nothing left except her and the kids. No friends, no family, no support system. When she's ready to move on, he'll be completely alone. I closed my eyes, seeing my son's future stretched out before him. Isolated, abandoned, probably broke if Sharon was as calculating as she appeared to be. And the children caught in the middle of it all, used as pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. What do you want me to do? I asked. Tony stood up, gathering his papers and photos. I want you to help me save our family, both of us, because that's what we are, Mr. Martinez family. You're Eddie's grandfather in every way that matters, even if we don't share DNA, and I'm not going to let Sharon destroy that just because she's afraid of the truth. He handed me a business card with his contact information. Think about it, but don't think too long. They'll be back from their cruise in a few days, and when they are, Sharon's going to be watching for any sign that you're becoming a problem again. If we're going to act, it has to be soon. After Tony left, I sat in my living room holding the DNA results and staring at that business card. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, and the house felt quieter than ever. But for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the calm before a storm because Sharon Taylor or Brenda Clark or whatever her real name was had made a critical mistake. She'd thought she could erase me completely, make me irrelevant to my own family's story. But I wasn't gone yet. And now that I knew what she really was, I wasn't going anywhere. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I spent them researching everything I could about Sharon's real identity, calling the investigator Tony had hired, and consulting with a lawyer about the legal implications of what we'd discovered. The more I learned, the sicker I felt. This wasn't just a woman who'd made some bad choices. This was a predator who specialized in targeting vulnerable families. Her pattern was always the same. Find a man who was emotionally vulnerable, recently widowed or divorced, someone who desperately wanted a family. Move fast to establish intimacy and dependency. Get pregnant quickly to lock in the relationship. Then systematically isolate the target from anyone who might provide outside perspective or support. The lawyer explained that proving paternity fraud would be complicated, especially since Danny wasn't aware of the deception and the children were innocent victims. But there were other charges that might stick. Identity theft, marriage fraud, possibly welfare fraud if she'd claimed benefits under false pretenses. More importantly, if we could prove that Sharon had deliberately deceived Danny about Eddie's parentage, it could be grounds for annulling the marriage and potentially giving Danny full custody of Nancy. That assumed, of course, that Danny would be willing to listen to the truth. That was the part that scared me most. My son had been manipulated for 7 years. He'd built his entire adult identity around being Eddie's father and Sharon's husband. Destroying those foundations might destroy him too, but leaving them intact would definitely destroy our relationship and possibly his financial future. Tony and I met twice more, planning carefully how to present our evidence. We decided the best approach would be to confront Sharon directly, preferably with Danny present, and give her a chance to come clean. If she refused, we'd have no choice but to present the DNA results and let the chips fall where they may. I called Danny on Saturday morning. They'd been back from the cruise for 2 days, and I hadn't heard a word from any of them, not a thank you for the birthday wishes, not even a casual "how are you doing?" The silence was deafening, but it was also strategic. Time to plan my next move. "Hey, Dad." Danny's voice was relaxed, happy. "How's it going?" "Good, son." "Listen, I was hoping we could all get together for dinner this weekend. I have something important I'd like to discuss with you and Sharon." There was a pause on the other end. "Is everything okay? You sound serious." "Everything's fine. I just think it's time we had a real family conversation. About us, about the future. I've been doing some thinking while you were away." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear Sharon's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. When Danny came back on the line, his tone was more cautious. "Sharon wants to know what kind of conversation. She's concerned that you might be upset about the cruise timing." Of course she was concerned. Sharon's instincts were sharp. She could probably sense that something had shifted even through the phone. "Tell Sharon I'm not upset about anything. I just think it's important for families to communicate openly, don't you?" "Saturday evening would be perfect. I'll cook. Let me check with Sharon and get back to you." The fact that my 35-year-old son needed to check with his wife about having dinner with his father would have been laughable if it weren't so heartbreaking. But I kept my voice light, of course. "Let me know." He called back 2 hours later. "Saturday works. 6. Perfect. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone." That gave me 4 days to prepare for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my life. Tony and I coordinated our approach. He would arrive at 7 r, giving me time to have dinner with the family and ease into the subject. Then we'd present our evidence together, a united front that would be harder for Sharon to dismiss or manipulate. I spent Friday shopping for Danny's favorite meal. Grilled chicken with rice and beans, the kind of comfort food he'd loved since childhood. If this was going to be the last family dinner we ever shared, I wanted it to be memorable for the right reasons, at least initially. Saturday evening arrived gray and drizzly. I set the dining room table with my good dishes, the same ones I'd planned to use for my birthday celebration 2 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. They arrived precisely at 6:04. Sharon was wearing a flowing yellow dress that made her look younger, more innocent. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like the picture of a devoted wife and mother, someone incapable of deception. Eddie bounded through the door first, all 7-year-old energy and excitement. "Grandpa Carl, I learned to swim on the cruise. Want to see me do the backstroke?" My heart clenched as I hugged him, knowing what I was about to reveal would change everything for this innocent child. "Maybe after dinner, buddy? Go wash your hands." Nancy followed more quietly. clutching a small seashell in her palm. At 5, she was more reserved than her brother, more cautious around me since Sharon had started discouraging their affection. But she still let me kiss her forehead before following Eddie to the bathroom. Danny hugged me warmly, and for a moment I could pretend this was just a normal family dinner. "Something smells incredible, Dad. I've missed your cooking." "You look tired," I observed. He did. There were new lines around his eyes and he'd lost weight. "Work's been brutal lately. The new supervisor's got everyone stressed." He glanced at Sharon, who was examining my living room like she was cataloging potential problems. "But Sharon keeps telling me, I need to find a better work-life balance. Stress is so bad for your health." "Stress is terrible for your health," Sharon said, appearing beside us with that practiced smile. "I keep encouraging Danny to consider early retirement. We could travel more, spend more time with the children, early retirement at 35. Another way to make Danny completely dependent on her, cutting him off from his professional identity and income." I smiled back pleasantly. "How wonderful that you're thinking about the future. That's actually related to what I wanted to discuss tonight." During dinner, I kept the conversation light. The children chattered about their cruise adventures, and Sharon played the perfect mother, cutting Eddie's meat and reminding Nancy to use her napkin. She was good at this performance, warm, attentive, completely believable, but I noticed things I'd missed before. How she interrupted when Eddie started telling a story about missing me while they were gone. How she redirected Nancy's attention when the little girl asked why I hadn't come on the trip with them. How she subtly managed every interaction, controlling the flow of conversation and affection. After the children finished eating, I suggested they play in the living room while the adults talked. Sharon immediately objected. "Oh, they should probably get ready to go soon. Tomorrow's a school day, and we like to keep their routine consistent." "This won't take long," I said firmly, "and I think what I have to share might affect their routine quite a bit." Something flickered across Sharon's face just for a second, but I caught it. Fear. When the children were settled with their toys in the next room, I returned to the dining room where Danny and Sharon waited. The manila folder sat on the table beside my coffee cup like a loaded weapon. "So," Danny said, reaching for Sharon's hand across the table, "what did you want to talk about?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I wanted to talk about honesty, about family, about the importance of knowing who we really are. Sharon's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a little philosophical for dinner conversation, is it?" "I don't think so." I picked up the manila folder, feeling both of them tense. "You see, I've learned some interesting things recently about family history, about genetics, about the importance of medical records and accurate information." "Dad," Danny said slowly, "what's in the folder?" "The truth." I opened it and pulled out the DNA results, setting them on the table between us. "These are the results of a paternity test for Eddie." The silence that followed was deafening. Danny stared at the papers like they might burst into flames. Sharon went very still, her face carefully blank. "A paternity test." Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you? How did you?" "The test shows that you're not Eddie's biological father," I said gently. "There's a 99.7% probability that another man is his father, a man named Tony Williams." Sharon stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane, Carl. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but sit down, Brenda." The use of her real name hit like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward, her face going white. Danny looked between us, confusion and growing horror warring in his expression. "Brenda, Dad, what's going on?" I pulled out the investigator's report, the marriage certificates, the timeline documentation. Sharon's real name is Brenda Clark. She's been married twice before, and she has a pattern of lying about her identity in her past. She was involved with Tony Williams before she met you, Danny. She left him when she was pregnant with his child and came to find a new father for her baby. "That's not true," Sharon said, but her voice was shaking now. "Danny, don't listen to this. Your father has obviously had some kind of breakdown. Eddie was born 7 months after you two met." I continued relentlessly. "You thought he was premature, but he wasn't. He was born exactly on schedule for the timeline of Sharon's relationship with Tony." Danny picked up the DNA results with hands that were trembling. I watched his face as he read them, watched the color drain from his cheeks as the numbers sank in. "This can't be right," he whispered. That's when the doorbell rang. Tony Williams was right on time. I excused myself and went to answer the door, leaving Danny staring at the papers and Sharon backing toward the kitchen like a cornered animal. When I returned with Tony, the atmosphere in the dining room had shifted completely. The pretense of a normal family dinner was gone, replaced by something raw and dangerous. "This is Tony Williams," I said simply, "Eddie's biological father." Tony stood in the doorway for a moment, his eyes immediately finding Sharon. She looked at him like she was seeing a ghost, which in a way she was. "Hello, Sharon," or should I say Brenda. Danny's head snapped up. "You know each other?" Tony's voice was steady, controlled. "We lived together for 2 years. We were engaged. She was carrying my child when she disappeared without a word." The room felt like it might explode. Danny looked between Tony and Sharon, his world crumbling in real time. I could see him trying to process the information, trying to make sense of a reality that didn't match anything he thought he knew about his life. "This is impossible," Danny said, finally. "Sharon, tell them this is crazy. Tell them you've never seen this man before." But Sharon couldn't speak. She stood frozen against the wall, her perfect composure completely shattered. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no lies ready, no manipulation tactics, no smooth deflection. Tony pulled out his phone and showed Danny the same childhood photo he'd shown me. The resemblance to Eddie was undeniable. Danny stared at the image for a long time, then looked at the DNA results again. His breathing was getting shallow and fast. "I don't understand," he whispered. "How is this possible? Sharon and I, we've been together for 7 years. Eddie is my son. I named him after my grandfather. I taught him to ride a bike. I held him when he had nightmares. And you'll always be his father in every way that matters," Tony said quietly. "I'm not here to take him away from you, Danny. I'm here because Sharon has been manipulating all of us, and it needs to stop." Sharon finally found her voice. "You don't understand. Danny, these men are trying to destroy our family. Everything we've built together, everything we have. Don't let them poison you against me." But Danny wasn't listening to her anymore. He was staring at the documents spread across the table, seeing the pattern for the first time. The fake names, the previous marriages, the calculated timeline. "Tell me about the cruise," he said suddenly. "What?" Sharon looked confused by the change of subject. "The cruise for Dad's birthday. When did you book it?" Sharon's eyes darted between Danny and me. "I told you, it was a last-minute deal. I found it online and just went for it." Danny pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "According to my credit card statement, you booked this trip 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks before Dad's birthday. You planned this specifically to exclude him." The evidence was mounting, each piece fitting into a larger picture that Sharon couldn't explain away. Danny's hands were shaking as he scrolled through more charges. "And this one from 3 months ago. A private investigator. Why would you hire a private investigator, Sharon?" I could see the moment when everything clicked for Danny. The realization that his wife hadn't just lied about Eddie's parentage. She'd been systematically isolating him from his father, controlling his finances, monitoring his activities, building a cage around him so gradually that he'd never noticed the bars. "You've been watching me," he said, his voice flat with shock, "controlling me, making sure I had no one but you." From the living room came the sound of children's laughter. Eddie and Nancy playing their innocent games, unaware that their world was imploding in the next room. The sound broke something in Danny's face. "What about Nancy?" he asked. "Is she even mine?" "Yes," Tony said quickly. "Nancy is definitely your daughter, born 2 years after Eddie when you and Sharon were definitely together. But Danny, there's something else you need to know. Something about your finances." I pulled out another folder, one that contained the financial documents the investigator had uncovered. Sharon had been systematically draining Danny's accounts for months, transferring money to accounts in her real name, preparing, it seemed, for another disappearance. Danny stared at the bank statements, his face going from shock to rage. "You've been stealing from me," he said, his voice barely controlled. "Our joint savings account. The college fund I started for the kids, even the money I put aside for Dad's birthday gift. Sharon tried one last desperate play, Danny, please. These men are manipulating you. They're trying to turn you against your own family. Think about Eddie. Think about Nancy. Do you really want to destroy their lives based on some papers that could be forged?" But it was too late. Danny had seen too much, understood too much. The pattern was clear now, undeniable. He stood up slowly, his chair sliding back with a scrape that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense room. "I want you out," he said quietly. "Out of my house, out of my life, out of my children's lives. Danny, no." Sharon's mask was completely gone now, replaced by something desperate and ugly. "You don't understand what you're doing. I love you. I love our family. Everything I did was to protect us. Protect us from what? From my father? From honesty, from the truth. Danny's voice was getting louder, years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. You used my son as a weapon against me. You stole my money. You turned me against my own father. What exactly were you protecting? Sharon looked around the room wildly, searching for an escape route or maybe just someone who might believe her lies. Her eyes landed on me, and for a moment I saw something almost like pleading there. Carl, she said, her voice taking on that syrupy tone she used when she wanted something. You know me. You've watched me raise those children for 7 years. I made mistakes, yes, but I'm still their mother. I'm still part of this family. No, I said simply. You're not. You never were. You were just pretending to be. From the living room, Eddie's voice called out, Daddy, can we have ice cream now? The innocent question hit the room like a bomb. Here was this sweet little boy calling Danny Daddy, having no idea that his entire world was about to change. What do I tell them? Danny asked, his anger deflating into something that looked like despair. How do I explain this to a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old? We'll figure it out, Tony said gently. Together, step by step. The most important thing is that Eddie knows he's loved and wanted by both of his fathers. And Nancy needs to know that none of this changes how much you love her. Sharon made us sound like a wounded animal. You can't take my children from me. I won't let you. I'll fight this. I'll get lawyers. I'll tell them you're all lying. With what money? Danny asked, holding up the bank statements. The accounts you emptied? The credit cards you maxed out in my name? Good luck finding a lawyer who'll work for free. The reality of her situation seemed to hit Sharon all at once. She'd been caught, exposed, and her usual tactics weren't working. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no control over the situation. She looked at the three of us standing there, united against her, and I could see her calculating, weighing her options, deciding whether to keep fighting or cut her losses. Fine, she said finally, her voice flat and cold. But I want to say goodbye to the children. They deserve that much. No, Danny said immediately. You don't get to confuse them more than you already have. You don't get to use them as emotional weapons one more time. If you want contact with Nancy in the future, we'll work something out through lawyers. But not tonight. Not like this. Sharon's composure cracked completely then. She started crying, but they weren't tears of genuine emotion. They were the calculated tears of someone who'd learned to use crying as a manipulation tactic. When she saw that none of us were moved by her performance, the tears stopped as suddenly as they'd started. I'll pack a bag, she said, her voice icy. But this isn't over. I'll be back for my daughter. Nancy is my daughter, Danny corrected. You're the woman who gave birth to her. There's a difference. Sharon stormed out of the dining room, and we could hear her upstairs moving around, opening and closing drawers. Tony and Danny and I stood there in the wreckage of what had been a family dinner, trying to process what had just happened. Dad, Danny said finally, I'm sorry for everything. For letting her turn me against you, for missing your birthday, for not seeing what she was doing. I pulled my son into a hug, feeling his shoulders shake. You couldn't have known, I said. She was good at what she did, too good, but it's over now. What happens next? He asked. Tony answered first. Legally, I'd like to establish paternity officially and work out some kind of custody arrangement for Eddie. Nothing that disrupts his life, just formal recognition that I'm his biological father and that I want to be part of his life. And financially, I added, we need to figure out what Sharon took and see if any of it can be recovered. The investigator thinks some of the transfers might be reversible if we act quickly. But first, Danny said, we need to tell the children something. Not everything, but something. They're going to notice that Sharon is gone. We decided to keep it simple for now. Sharon had to go away for a while. Daddy and Grandpa Carl were going to take care of everything. Uncle Tony was a friend who was going to be around more often. The details could wait until the children were older and better able to understand. When Sharon came downstairs with her suitcase, the children were still playing in the living room, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. She paused at the doorway looking at them, and for just a moment I saw something that might have been genuine regret cross her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation that seemed to be her default setting. She walked out without saying goodbye to anyone, without looking back. The front door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow sounded final. We stood there for a moment, the three of us listening to the sound of the children playing in the next room. The house felt different already, like a weight had been lifted from the air itself. Danny, Tony said quietly, I know this is overwhelming. If you need time to process everything before we talk about custody arrangements, I understand. Danny shook his head. No, I want to get this sorted out as soon as possible for Eddie's sake and for everyone's, but I have one condition. Eddie doesn't learn about any of this until he's old enough to understand it properly. As far as he's concerned, I'm still his dad, and you're a friend of the family who wants to be around more. Tony nodded immediately. That's exactly what I was hoping for. I don't want to disrupt his life or confuse him, I just want to be part of it. And what about Sharon? I asked. Do we press charges? Report the financial fraud? Danny was quiet for a long moment, considering the money. Yes. I need to try to recover what I can for the kids' sake. But as for criminal charges, he hesitated. I don't know. Part of me wants her to face consequences for what she's done, but another part of me just wants her gone, out of our lives completely. She'll probably disappear again anyway, Tony said. It's what she does when things get too complicated. The investigator thinks she's already got another identity prepared, maybe another target already lined up. The thought made me sick. Somewhere out there, another man was probably falling for Sharon's act, another family being set up for the same kind of manipulation and betrayal we'd just experienced. But that wasn't our problem anymore. Our problem was picking up the pieces and moving forward. Daddy, Eddie appeared in the doorway, Nancy close behind him. Can we have ice cream now? We've been really good. Danny looked at his children, and I could see him struggling with how much their world had just changed while they remained blissfully unaware. Of course you can, buddy. Why don't you guys go pick out what flavor you want while the adults finish talking? As the children ran to the kitchen, chattering excitedly about ice cream choices, Tony pulled out his phone. I should probably get going soon. This has been a lot for everyone to process, but maybe we could meet again this week to talk about practical things. Danny nodded. How about Wednesday evening? After the kids are in bed? Wednesday sounds perfect. Tony paused, looking uncertain for the first time since he'd arrived. Danny, I just want you to know I don't expect anything from you. I'm grateful that you're willing to let me be part of Eddie's life, but I understand that you're his real father. I don't want to complicate that. You're not complicating anything, Danny said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. If anything, you're helping me understand why things have felt so wrong for so long. Why I've felt like I was losing my own family. After Tony left, Danny and I sat with the children while they ate their ice cream. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal after everything that had just happened. Eddie chattered about school, Nancy showed us a drawing she'd made on the cruise, and for a few minutes, it was possible to pretend that this was just another ordinary evening. But when bedtime came and the children asked where Mommy was, the reality hit again. She had to go away for a while, Danny explained, his voice carefully neutral. But Grandpa Carl and I are here, and we're going to take care of everything. Is she coming back? Nancy asked, her lower lip trembling. She was only 5, but children sense when something fundamental has shifted in their world. I don't know, sweetheart, Danny said honestly. But what I do know is that you're safe and loved, and that's never going to change. After the children were finally asleep, Danny and I sat in his kitchen drinking coffee and trying to make sense of the evening's revelations. I feel like such an idiot, Danny said. How did I not see it? How did I let her manipulate me for 7 years? Because you loved her, I said. Because you trusted her. Because you're a good man who doesn't think the worst of people. Those aren't character flaws, son. They're exactly the qualities that made her target you. But she turned me against you. She made me choose between her and my own father, and I chose her. How do I live with that? You live with it by not making the same mistake again. You live with it by being the father to Eddie and Nancy that I tried to be to you. You live with it by rebuilding the relationships that matter. Danny was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. Do you think Eddie will be okay? Finding out someday that I'm not his biological father? I think Eddie is lucky, I said. He's got 2 men who love him enough to put his well-being first. Not every kid can say that. What about you, Dad? Are you okay with all this? With Tony being around? I thought about it honestly before answering. A month ago, I would have said that anyone who threatened my family was my enemy, but Tony isn't threatening our family, he's trying to save it, same as we are. We talked until nearly midnight, planning and worrying and trying to imagine what our new normal would look like. Eventually, Danny offered to let me stay the night, considering everything that had happened. I should get home, I said. But maybe tomorrow night, if you need help with the kids. Danny smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. I'd like that. And Dad, thank you. For not giving up on us, for fighting for this family, even when I couldn't see what was happening. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I thought about how much had changed in just a few hours. This morning, I'd been a man slowly being erased from his own family's story. Tonight, I was part of something new and complicated but honest. Sharon had tried to destroy our family by building it on lies. But maybe what she'd actually done was show us how strong our real bonds could be when they were built on truth. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, financial recovery efforts, and trying to establish a new routine for the children. True to form, Sharon had vanished completely. Her cell phone was disconnected, her social media accounts deleted, and the apartment she'd been secretly renting under her real name was empty. The investigator managed to trace some of the money she'd stolen to accounts in other states, but recovering it would take time and probably wouldn't be complete. Still, Danny was able to get back about 60% of what she'd taken, enough to stabilize his finances and secure the children's future. Tony proved to be everything Sharon wasn't: patient, honest, and genuinely concerned with what was best for everyone involved. He started coming around twice a week, initially just to see Eddie, but gradually becoming part of our extended family routine. The hardest part was watching Eddie adjust to his mother's absence. For the first week, he asked about her constantly. Where was Mommy? When was she coming back? Why had she left without saying goodbye? Danny and I took turns fielding these questions, trying to give answers that were honest but age-appropriate. Nancy, being younger, seemed to bounce back more quickly. She missed Sharon, but she also thrived with the increased attention from Danny and me. It was like she could sense that the tension that had always existed in the house was gone, replaced by something more genuine and relaxed. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Danny called me with news that was both expected and devastating. Sharon had filed for divorce from another state, along with a claim for custody of both children. Her lawyer had painted her as the victim of a conspiracy between Danny, Tony, and me. I was expecting this, Danny said, but his voice was tight with stress. My lawyer says it's just a fishing expedition. She's hoping to get some kind of settlement to make the whole thing go away. What did your lawyer recommend? Fight it on every front. The DNA evidence, the financial fraud, the identity theft, all of it. He thinks we have a strong case, but family court can be unpredictable. Do you want me to testify? I asked. If it would help, probably. And Tony too. The lawyer wants to establish that Sharon has a pattern of deceptive behavior, and that her sudden departure proves she's not capable of providing stability for the children. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Sharon's lawyer tried every tactic in the book, claiming that the DNA test was invalid, that Tony and I had coerced Danny, even that the financial records had been falsified. But the evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. During this time, our new family dynamic started to solidify. Tony officially established paternity for Eddie through the court system, but made it clear that he wasn't trying to replace Danny as the boy's father. Instead, he became something like an uncle figure, someone who was around for games and advice, but who deferred to Danny on all the important decisions. Eddie, for his part, seemed to accept the situation with the resilience that children possess. He started calling Tony by his first name, but gradually warmed up to him. It helped that Tony never pushed, never tried to win affection through gifts or promises, just showed up consistently and proved himself reliable. The breakthrough came about 2 months after Sharon left. Eddie had fallen off his bike and scraped his knee pretty badly. Danny was at work, I was at the grocery store, but Tony happened to be visiting. He cleaned the wound, bandaged it up, and distracted Eddie with stories until the tears stopped. When I got home and found them playing catch in the backyard, Eddie's knee properly bandaged and his mood completely restored, I realized that Tony had passed some kind of test. Not with me or Danny, but with Eddie himself. Uncle Tony fixed my knee, Eddie announced proudly. He said real men take care of each other when they're hurt. That evening, Danny and I talked about what we'd observed. He's good with kids, Danny said, and he doesn't try to compete with me for Eddie's attention. I was worried it would be weird, having the biological father around, but it's not. If anything, it's helpful. What do you mean? I asked. Well, when Eddie asks questions about why he looks different from me and Nancy, I can tell him the truth now. That some families are built in different ways, but love is what makes them real. Before, when Sharon was here, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells around that topic. It was true. The lies that Sharon had built our family on had created a foundation of anxiety and uncertainty. Everyone had sensed that something was wrong, even if they couldn't identify what. Now, with the truth out in the open, there was a sense of relief that affected everyone. The court case finally concluded 4 months after Sharon left. The judge ruled decisively in Danny's favor, granting him full physical custody of Nancy and joint legal custody of Eddie with Tony. Sharon was ordered to pay restitution for the financial theft and was given supervised visitation rights that she never exercised. More importantly for our peace of mind, The judge's ruling included a detailed account of Sharon's deceptive behavior that would follow her to any future custody disputes. If she ever tried this again with another family, there would be a paper trail. On the day the ruling came down, Danny, Tony, and I celebrated with a quiet dinner at my house. The children were there too, playing in the backyard while we grilled burgers and tried to process the fact that our legal nightmare was finally over. You know what the strangest thing is? Danny said. Watching Eddie and Nancy chase fireflies as the sun set. I feel like I have a family again, a real one. Not the performance that Sharon was directing, but something genuine. Tony nodded. Eddie asked me yesterday if I was going to keep coming around. When I said yes, he said good, because he liked having two dads and didn't want to go back to having just one. I thought about that, about how a 7-year-old had adapted to a complicated situation with more grace than most adults could manage, about how truth, even difficult truth, was better than the most beautiful lie. 6 months after Sharon left, something unexpected happened. Danny got a promotion at the factory, one he'd been passed over for 3 times while he was married to Sharon. When I congratulated him, he had an interesting observation. "You know what's funny, Dad?" he said. "My supervisor told me that he'd wanted to promote me before, but he was concerned about my home situation. He said I always seemed distracted, stressed, like I had too much drama going on outside of work to handle additional responsibilities." It made sense. Sharon's constant manipulation, the financial stress she'd created, the isolation from family and friends, all of it had affected Danny's performance without him even realizing it. Now that he was free from that psychological burden, he was thriving in ways he hadn't in years. The promotion came with a significant raise, which helped offset the money Sharon had stolen and put the family on solid financial ground. More importantly, it gave Danny back his confidence. He started talking about the future again, making plans, setting goals. Tony, meanwhile, had become a fixture in our lives. He picked up Eddie from school twice a week, attended parent-teacher conferences, and helped with homework. He never overstepped boundaries with Danny, but he was consistently present in a way that Eddie could count on. The relationship between Tony and Danny evolved too. Initially, they'd been united by their shared experience as Sharon's victims. But over time, they developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and their commitment to the children's well-being. One evening, about 8 months after the confrontation, Tony brought up something that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about Sharon," he said. "We were sitting on Danny's back porch while the kids played in the yard, about whether we should try to track her down. Why would we want to do that?" Danny asked, immediately defensive. "Not to bring her back," Tony clarified quickly, "but to make sure she doesn't do this to someone else. The investigator thinks she might have already moved on to her next target. I'd been thinking the same thing." The idea that Sharon was out there somewhere spinning her web around another unsuspecting family made me sick. But what could we do? She was careful, probably using a new identity, and the police had shown little interest in pursuing her across state lines for what they saw as a civil matter. Maybe we could create some kind of warning system. Danny suggested post about her on social media, make sure her picture and real name are out there. The lawyer advised against that, Tony said. Defamation laws. Even though everything we'd say would be true, she could still sue us for damaging her reputation. "What reputation?" I asked. But I understood the legal concern. We'd won the battle against Sharon, but we couldn't afford to give her ammunition for a new war. In the end, we decided to let it go. Sharon was someone else's problem now, and our energy was better spent building the life we wanted rather than fighting the ghosts of the past. That autumn, Eddie started 2nd grade, and Nancy started kindergarten. They were both thriving. Eddie's teacher commented on how much more confident and outgoing he'd become since the previous year. Nancy, meanwhile, was making friends easily and showing a particular talent for art. The most significant change was in Eddie's relationship with me. Without Sharon there to manage and manipulate his interactions with his grandfather, he started seeking me out on his own. He'd call me to tell me about things that happened at school, ask if I wanted to come to his soccer games, invite me to help with school projects. One Saturday afternoon, while Tony and Danny were working on fixing the back porch steps, Eddie came to sit beside me on the swing. "Grandpa Carl," he said, using the serious tone that 8-year-old boys employ when they're wrestling with big concepts. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy." "Why did Mommy leave?" It was the question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. How do you explain to a child that his mother was a predator who used him as a tool? How do you tell him that she never really loved him the way a mother should? "Sometimes adults make choices that are hard to understand," I said carefully. "Your mommy had some problems that she didn't know how to fix, and she thought leaving would be easier than staying and working on them. but she didn't say goodbye. Nancy and I, we didn't do anything wrong, did we? Oh, sweetheart, no. You and Nancy are perfect exactly as you are. What your mommy did had nothing to do with you. It was about her and her problems, not about anything you did or didn't do. Eddie was quiet for a while, thinking. Then he said something that broke my heart and filled it at the same time. I'm glad she left. Is that bad to say? Why are you glad? I asked. Because now you and Daddy and Uncle Tony are all happy. Before, everyone was always walking on eggshells, like there was something wrong, but nobody would say what it was. Now we can just be ourselves. Out of the mouths of babes, this 8-year-old had articulated something that had taken the adults months to fully understand. Sharon's manipulation had created an atmosphere of constant low-level anxiety. Everyone had sensed that something was wrong, but her gaslighting had made them doubt their own perceptions. It's not bad to feel relief when something that was hurting your family goes away, I told him. It's actually pretty smart. That evening, I shared Eddie's observation with Danny and Tony. It led to one of our most honest conversations yet about what life had been like under Sharon's control and how much better things were now. I keep expecting the other shoe to drop, Danny admitted. Like this is all too good to last and something terrible is going to happen to break it apart again. That's trauma talking, Tony said. She trained all of us to expect manipulation, to second-guess our own happiness. It's going to take time to unlearn that. He was right. Sharon's legacy wasn't just the financial damage or the lies about Eddie's parentage. It was the psychological scars, the way she taught us not to trust our own judgment, not to believe that good things could last. But we were learning. Slowly, carefully, we were building new patterns based on trust and honesty, instead of manipulation and control. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks, moments when old habits of doubt and second-guessing would surface, but we kept working at it. 1 year after Sharon left, something remarkable happened. Danny started dating again. Her name was Linda Parker, a teacher at Nancy's school. She was divorced with no children of her own, warm and straightforward in a way that was the complete opposite of Sharon's calculated charm. I was nervous when Danny first told me about her. Not because I didn't want him to be happy, but because I was terrified that he might fall into the same pattern again. Choose someone who looked good on the surface but was hiding something darker underneath, but Linda was different from the start. She didn't try to rush the relationship or push for immediate commitment. She didn't attempt to isolate Danny from his family or control his interactions with the children. If anything, she encouraged him to maintain his close relationships and made it clear that she had no interest in replacing Sharon as the children's mother figure. When Danny brought her to Sunday dinner for the first time, I watched her carefully. How did she interact with Eddie and Nancy? Did she try too hard to win their affection? Or did she let the relationship develop naturally? Was she genuinely interested in what they had to say, or was she performing for Danny's benefit? What I saw was a woman who was comfortable with herself, who didn't need to manipulate or control to feel secure. She asked the children questions about their interests and listened to their answers. She helped clear the table without being asked. She treated Tony as a welcome part of the family dynamic rather than competition to be eliminated. Most importantly, she didn't try to erase Sharon's existence or pretend that the children's history didn't matter. When Nancy mentioned missing her mommy, Linda didn't change the subject or try to redirect the conversation. She simply acknowledged that it was normal to miss someone who used to be important in your life even when they'd made choices that hurt you. The contrast with Sharon was stark. Where Sharon had been all manipulation and performance, Linda was genuine. Where Sharon had demanded to be the center of attention, Linda was content to be part of the group. Where Sharon had worked to divide the family, Linda brought us together. 6 months into their relationship, Linda did something that sealed my approval completely. She pulled me aside after a family dinner and asked if she could talk to me privately. I wanted to ask you about something, she said. We were sitting on my back porch watching Danny and Tony help the children build a fort in the yard. Danny's told me some of what happened with Sharon, and I want to make sure I'm handling this right. What do you mean? I mean with the children. I know they've been through a lot of trauma, and I don't want to do anything that might make it worse. I'm not trying to replace their mother or step into that role too quickly, but I also don't want to keep them at arm's length if they need stability and affection. It was exactly the right question to ask, and it told me everything I needed to know about Linda's character. Sharon would never have considered the children's emotional needs when making decisions. She would have done whatever served her own purposes and justified it later. I think you're handling it perfectly, I told her. The children need to know that adult women can be trustworthy and consistent, but they also need to process their feelings about Sharon on their own timeline. The fact that you're thinking about their well-being first tells me you're the right kind of person for this family. Linda smiled, but there was still concern in her eyes. There's something else. Danny mentioned that Sharon might try to come back someday. If that happens, I want you to know that I won't run away or make him choose between dealing with his past and building a future. I'm in this for the long haul. That conversation convinced me that Danny had learned from his mistakes. He'd chosen someone who was strong enough to handle the complications in his life, honest enough to ask difficult questions, and secure enough not to feel threatened by his relationships with his children, his father, or even Tony. The relationship continued to develop in healthy ways. Linda never pushed for marriage or demanded commitments before Danny was ready. She established her own relationships with Eddie and Nancy, becoming someone they could talk to and trust without trying to replace Sharon in their minds. When Eddie had nightmares, Linda was there to comfort him. When Nancy needed help with a school project, Linda offered assistance without making it about herself. She showed up to soccer games and dance recitals not as someone demanding recognition, but as someone who genuinely cared about the children's happiness. 2 years after Sharon left, Tony got some unexpected news. The private investigator called to tell him that Sharon had been arrested in Arizona. She'd been running the same scam on a widowed rancher, complete with a fake pregnancy and a false identity. But this time, her target had been suspicious enough to hire his own investigator before things went too far. The Arizona authorities were interested in our case because it established a pattern of behavior that strengthened their prosecution. They asked Tony, Danny, and me to provide testimony and documentation, which we were happy to do. In the end, Sharon was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and identity theft. It wasn't enough to make up for all the damage she'd caused, but it was something. More importantly, it meant she was off the streets and couldn't hurt another family for a while. When we told the children that their biological mother was in trouble with the law, we kept the explanation age appropriate. She'd made some bad choices, and now she had to face the consequences. It was a lesson about accountability that I hope they'd remember as they grew up. Eddie, now 10, had a typically thoughtful response. Does this mean she won't try to come back and mess up our family again? For a while at least, I told him. But even if she did, we're stronger now than we were before. We know how to protect each other. That was true. We were stronger. The experience with Sharon had taught us to recognize manipulation tactics, to value honesty over performance, and to protect the relationships that really mattered. But more than that, it had shown us what a real family looked like when it was built on truth instead of lies. 3 years after Sharon left, Danny and Linda got engaged. It wasn't a surprise to anyone. What was surprising was how different this engagement felt from Danny's first one. There was no rush, no pressure, no sense that someone was trying to lock down a relationship before the other person could change their mind. Instead, it felt like a natural progression of something that had been growing steadily stronger. Danny proposed at Christmas in front of the whole family, including Tony. It was important to him that everyone who mattered was there to witness this new beginning. Eddie and Nancy were thrilled. They'd grown to love Linda not as a replacement for their biological mother, but as someone new and special in their lives. Linda had made it clear from the beginning that she wasn't trying to erase Sharon's place in their history. Instead, she was creating her own place, one based on consistency, kindness, and genuine care. The wedding was everything Sharon's wedding hadn't been. Small, intimate, focused on the couple and their commitment to each other rather than on creating a perfect image for social media. The children were part of the ceremony, not as props, but as real participants in the creation of a new family unit. Tony walked Eddie down the aisle as a junior groomsman, a moment that would have been unthinkable years earlier, but now felt completely natural. Beverly and Gary came in from out of state, and even they commented on how much happier and more relaxed everyone seemed. But it was during the reception that something happened that really drove home how much our family had changed. Nancy, now 8, went up to the microphone during the open mic portion of the evening. "I want to say something about my new mom," she announced in her clear young voice. "Linda isn't like my first mom. She doesn't make promises she doesn't keep, and she doesn't lie to us, and she doesn't try to keep us away from the people we love. She makes us feel safe, and that's what moms are supposed to do." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Linda was crying. Danny was crying. Even Tony was wiping his eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of recognition that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose and build together. After the wedding, our family dynamic shifted again, but in positive ways. Linda brought her own traditions and perspectives, adding richness to our family culture rather than trying to replace what was already there. She had a way of bringing out the best in everyone, encouraging Eddie's interest in science, nurturing Nancy's artistic talents, and supporting Danny's growing confidence in all areas of his life. One of the most significant changes was in how we handled conflict. Under Sharon's influence, disagreements had been opportunities for manipulation and control. Now, with Linda's example, we learned that conflicts could be resolved through honest communication and compromise. When Eddie wanted to try out for the travel soccer team, but Danny was worried about the time commitment, they sat down together and worked out a plan. When Nancy wanted to take art classes, but the schedule conflicted with Tony's visitation time, we all talked it through until we found a solution that worked for everyone. These might seem like small things, but they represented a fundamental shift in how our family operated. Instead of one person making unilateral decisions and manipulating others into compliance, we became a unit that made decisions together, with everyone's needs and opinions taken into account. As the children got older, we began to tell them more of the truth about Sharon and what had happened during those 7 years. Not to poison them against their biological mother, but to help them understand the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships. Eddie, now 12, was old enough to understand the basic facts about his parentage. We explained that Sharon had lied about who his father was, that she'd used him as a tool to manipulate Danny, and that her leaving had actually been a blessing in disguise. His response was typically thoughtful. "So Tony is my real dad, but Danny is also my real dad, just in a different way." "Exactly," Tony said. "Biology is just one part of what makes someone a father. Love, commitment, being there when you need them. Those are the important parts, and you're lucky enough to have 2 men who want to be all of those things for you." Nancy's understanding was more limited because she was younger, but she grasped the essential point. Some people aren't good at being in families even when they're supposed to love you. That's why it's important to choose people who know how to love you the right way. Looking back on it now, 5 years after that terrible birthday party that started everything, I can see how Sharon's betrayal was actually the best thing that ever happened to our family. Not because betrayal is good, but because it forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationships. Danny learned to trust his own judgment again and to value people who enhanced his life rather than controlled it. Tony found his son and became part of a family that welcomed him completely. Eddie and Nancy learned what healthy adult relationships looked like and how to recognize manipulation when they encountered it. And I learned that families aren't always what they appear to be on the surface, but that doesn't make them any less real or valuable. Sometimes the most important families are the ones that are built through choice and commitment rather than just biology and circumstance. We still have Sunday dinners every week, just like I always wanted. But now they're genuine celebrations of our connection to each other, not performances designed to maintain an illusion. The laughter is real, the conversations are honest, and the love is unconditional. Sharon's imprisonment ended after 2 years for good behavior, but she never tried to contact us. According to the investigator, she'd moved to Florida and was apparently attempting to start a new life under yet another identity. Part of me hoped she'd learned something from her experience. But realistically, I knew that people like Sharon rarely changed their fundamental nature. What mattered was that we'd moved on. Our family had not just survived her manipulation, but had thrived in ways that wouldn't have been possible if she'd stayed. We'd learned to value authenticity over performance, substance over style, and genuine love over possessive control. Eddie graduated from high school with honors and a full scholarship to study engineering. During his graduation speech as valedictorian, he said something that made me incredibly proud. "I want to thank my family for teaching me that honesty isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. I've learned that the people who really love you will stand by you through difficult truths, and the people who can't handle honesty probably don't belong in your life anyway." He didn't mention Sharon specifically, but everyone who knew our story understood what he was talking about. He'd grown into a young man who could recognize manipulation and choose truth over comfortable lies. In a way, Sharon's betrayal had given him a gift that would protect him for the rest of his life. Nancy, now 16, had developed into a confident, artistic young woman who was planning to study graphic design in college. She'd inherited some of her biological mother's beauty, but none of her deceptive nature. Instead, she'd learned from Linda's example how to be strong without being manipulative, how to be attractive without being calculating. One day, when she was about 14, Nancy had asked me directly about Sharon. Not the sanitized version we'd given her as a child, but the real story about what had happened and why. "I want to understand her," she said, "not because I want a relationship with her, but because I need to know what to watch out for in other people, and maybe in myself." It was a mature question that deserved an honest answer. I told her everything, including the parts that were painful to remember. How Sharon had manipulated all of us, how she'd used the children as weapons, how she'd nearly destroyed our family through lies and deception. Nancy listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you think I'm like her?" she finally asked. "I mean, genetically. Do you think I might turn out to be manipulative too?" It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one that gave me the opportunity to explain something important. "You have her DNA," I said. "But that doesn't determine who you become. You've been raised by people who value honesty and kindness. You've seen what happens when someone chooses manipulation over truth. Most importantly, you're aware enough to ask the question, which means you're already choosing a different path." That seemed to satisfy her, and she never brought it up again. But I noticed that she was particularly sensitive to manipulation in her friendships and relationships. She had an instinct for recognizing when someone was being dishonest or trying to control her, and she didn't tolerate it. Danny and Linda's marriage continued to strengthen over the years. They had their challenges like any couple, but they faced them together with honesty and mutual respect. Watching them, I could see the difference between a partnership built on love and one built on deception. They decided not to have children of their own, partly because they felt complete with Eddie and Nancy, and partly because Linda had seen too many blended families struggle when new children entered the picture. It was a decision they made together, without manipulation or pressure from either side. Tony, meanwhile, had become like a brother to me. Our shared experience of being victims of Sharon's manipulation had created a bond that went beyond our mutual love for Eddie. He'd never remarried, dedicating himself to being the best father he could be and building a successful career as an auto parts store manager. When Eddie turned 18, Tony did something that demonstrated the kind of man he was. He offered to legally adopt Eddie, not to replace Danny as his father, but to formalize the relationship they'd built over the years. Eddie declined, but he was clearly touched by the offer. "I already have 2 fathers who love me," he said. "I don't need papers to make that real." It was exactly the right response, and it showed how well he understood the nature of love and family biology, and legal documents were just formalities. What mattered was the daily choice to show up, to care, to be present in someone's life. As I write this, I'm 68 years old. Eddie is 20 and in his 3rd year of college. Nancy is 18 and about to start her freshman year. Danny and Linda are talking about early retirement and maybe doing some traveling. Tony just bought a new house with a guest room specifically for when Eddie visits from college. We still have Sunday dinner every week when everyone's in town. The conversations are livelier now, full of discussions about classes and careers and future plans. But the core of what we built in the aftermath of Sharon's betrayal remains the same: a commitment to honesty, a dedication to supporting each other, and a recognition that families are built through choice as much as circumstance. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Tony had never knocked on my door that day, if Sharon's deception had never been exposed, if she'd continued to manipulate our family for years or even decades. The thought makes me shudder. But then I remember that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. Sharon's pattern of behavior was too consistent, too destructive to remain hidden forever. If it hadn't been Tony who exposed her, it would have been someone or something else. What matters is that when the truth did come out, we were strong enough to handle it. We chose to rebuild rather than retreat, to grow rather than give up. And we chose to be grateful for the hard lessons we'd learned along the way. I think about Sharon sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of sad curiosity. What had made her the way she was? What had happened in her childhood or young adulthood that turned her into someone who could only relate to others through manipulation and control? I'll never know the answers to those questions, and maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that her actions, destructive as they were, ultimately led us to something better than what we'd had before. The other day, Nancy asked me if I ever regretted exposing Sharon's lies. Would it have been better, she wondered, to let sleeping dogs lie, to keep the family together even if it was built on deception? It was a thoughtful question, the kind that Nancy specialized in. I considered it carefully before answering. "No," I told her. "Truth is always better than lies, even when it's painful, even when it destroys something that looks beautiful on the surface, because anything built on lies is ultimately hollow. It looks good, but it can't withstand pressure or time or genuine scrutiny. What we have now might be more complicated than what we had with Sharon, but it's real. And real things last." That conversation made me think about the broader lessons of our experience. How many families, I wondered, were living with similar deceptions? How many people were trapped in relationships built on manipulation rather than love? The statistics are sobering. Paternity fraud affects an estimated 2 to 3% of all children, though the real number might be higher because many cases go undetected. Financial abuse occurs in nearly 80% of abusive relationships. Identity theft and marriage fraud are growing problems as social media makes it easier to create false personas and target vulnerable people. But the statistics don't capture the full scope of the problem. They don't account for the emotional manipulation, the systematic isolation, the gradual erosion of self-confidence that people like Sharon specialize in. They don't measure the damage done to children who grow up in households where love is conditional and truth is negotiable. Our experience taught me that the best defense against this kind of manipulation is education and awareness. People need to know what the warning signs look like. They need to understand that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and honesty, not on control and deception. They need to know that if something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, even if they can't put their finger on exactly what's bothering them. They need to trust their instincts and maintain connections with people outside the relationship who can provide perspective and support. Most importantly, they need to understand that it's never too late to seek the truth, even when that truth might be painful or disruptive. These are the lessons I've tried to pass on to Eddie and Nancy as they've grown up, not just through lectures, but through example, by showing them what healthy relationships look like, by demonstrating that honesty, even difficult honesty, is always preferable to comfortable lies. Eddie's engineering studies have given him a practical framework for thinking about these issues. He talks about relationships the way he talks about building bridges or designing systems. They need solid foundations, he says. They need to be built to withstand stress and pressure. And if the foundation is flawed, it's better to rebuild than to keep patching over the cracks. Nancy's artistic perspective is different but equally valuable. She sees relationships as collaborative works of art, where both parties contribute their unique talents and perspectives to create something beautiful together. But she also understands that some people are destructive rather than creative, and that protecting the integrity of your work sometimes means saying no to collaborations that would compromise your vision. Both perspectives are valid, and both have helped our family develop a sophisticated understanding of what makes relationships healthy or unhealthy. The legal aftermath of Sharon's crimes continued for years after she was released from prison. There were civil suits, insurance claims, and ongoing efforts to recover assets. The financial damage was never fully repaired, but Danny's promotion and careful budgeting meant that the family remained stable. More importantly, the legal process provided a sense of closure and validation. Having Sharon's crimes officially recognized by the court system helped everyone understand that what had happened to us was real, serious, and not our fault. The investigator who'd originally helped Tony track down Sharon eventually started a consulting business specializing in cases of marriage fraud and identity theft. He told us that our case had become something of a teaching example in his field because it demonstrated so clearly how predators operate and how families can protect themselves. That knowledge that our experience might help protect other families gave additional meaning to everything we'd been through. Sharon's betrayal hadn't just destroyed one family's illusions, it had created a resource that could help other families avoid similar devastation. Tony often says that meeting Eddie was worth everything that came before, even the pain of being abandoned while Sharon was pregnant. I understand that sentiment completely. Sometimes the worst experiences in our lives lead to the best outcomes, not because the pain was necessary, but because we learned to transform that pain into something meaningful. The strength of our family now isn't despite what Sharon did to us, it's because of how we chose to respond to what she did. We could have let her betrayal poison us against trust, against love, against the possibility of building genuine relationships. Instead, we chose to learn from the experience and use that knowledge to build something better. That choice wasn't made once and forgotten. It was made daily, in small decisions and big ones, in the decision to keep Sunday dinners even when schedules got complicated, in the decision to support Linda when she was nervous about joining the family, in the decision to make room for Tony without diminishing Danny's role as Eddie's father, in the decision, made over and over again, to choose truth over comfort, authenticity over performance, and love over control. Those choices have given us a family that's stronger and more resilient than anything Sharon could have built through manipulation and lies. It's a family that can weather disagreements because we know how to communicate honestly. It's a family that can face challenges because we trust each other. It's a family that can celebrate successes because our joy isn't tainted by hidden agendas or ulterior motives. Last month, Eddie called me from college with exciting news. He'd been selected for a prestigious internship with an engineering firm that specialized in bridge construction. But what made him proudest wasn't the professional opportunity. It was something his supervisor had said during the interview. She told me that what impressed her most was my ability to ask direct questions and give honest answers, Eddie said. She said a lot of young people try to tell her what they think she wants to hear, but I just told her the truth about my experience and what I hoped to learn. Apparently, that's rarer than you'd think. I wasn't surprised to hear that Eddie's honesty had set him apart. In a world where performance often matters more than substance, genuine authenticity has become a valuable commodity. Sharon's manipulation had inadvertently taught us all to value and recognize the real thing. Nancy's latest art project was accepted into a statewide competition for high school students. The piece was a mixed media installation exploring the theme of family. It included photographs of our family over the years. But what made it powerful was her artist's statement. She wrote about how families aren't just the people you're born with, but the people who choose to love you even when they know the truth about who you are. She wrote about how sometimes the most beautiful things are created, not despite brokenness, but because of how the pieces get put back together. She included a before and after element showing our family during Sharon's time with us and our family as it exists now. The contrast was striking. In the earlier photos, everyone looked perfect but somehow distant from each other. In the recent photos, we looked more relaxed, more genuine, more connected. The judges awarded her first place, but more importantly, the project helped her articulate something she'd been feeling but couldn't express. Our family's strength came not from avoiding problems, but from facing them together with honesty and courage. Danny and Linda have started talking about their retirement plans. They want to travel, maybe volunteer with organizations that help families dealing with domestic abuse and fraud. Linda, with her background in education, is particularly interested in developing programs that teach children how to recognize manipulation and build healthy relationships. It's a worthy goal and one that grows directly out of our experience. We've learned that the best way to protect yourself from predators, like Sharon, is education and awareness. The more people understand about how manipulation works, the better equipped they are to recognize it and resist it. Tony recently started dating someone, a widow named Susan Davis, who works at the bank where he does business. It's been interesting to watch him navigate the early stages of a new relationship with all the wisdom he's gained from his experience with Sharon. He's not paranoid or distrustful, but he's careful. He asks direct questions and expects honest answers. He maintains his independence and his connections with our family. He's building the relationship slowly, based on genuine compatibility rather than intense chemistry or urgent need. Most importantly, he's introduced Susan to all of us early in the process, making it clear that we're a package deal. Anyone who wants to be part of his life has to be comfortable with his role as Eddie's father and his place in our extended family. Susan seems lovely, and she's passed the test that Sharon would have failed immediately. She's genuinely interested in hearing about Eddie's accomplishments and challenges. She doesn't see Tony's involvement with our family as competition for his attention, but as evidence of his character and capacity for commitment. The contrast with Sharon couldn't be more stark. Where Sharon had worked to isolate Tony from anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions, Susan encourages his family relationships. Where Sharon had been possessive and controlling, Susan is secure and supportive. It's a reminder that healthy people enhance your existing relationships rather than trying to replace them. They add to your life without demanding that you subtract from other areas. Beverly and Gary visit more often now, partly because there's no longer the underlying tension that made family gatherings stressful during Sharon's time with us. Beverly recently told me that she'd always felt like she was walking on eggshells around Sharon, never sure what would trigger an argument or create drama. Now our family gatherings are relaxed and enjoyable, full of genuine conversation and shared laughter. The children actually look forward to seeing their great aunt and great uncle, rather than treating visits as obligations to be endured. It's another example of how Sharon's removal from our family had positive effects that rippled out beyond the immediate household. Her manipulation had poisoned even extended relationships, creating an atmosphere of tension and artificial performance that affected everyone who came into contact with our family. I've started doing something that would have been impossible during Sharon's reign. I volunteer with a local men's group that provides support for fathers dealing with family court issues, custody disputes, and parental alienation. Many of the men I work with are dealing with manipulative ex-wives or ex-girlfriends who use children as weapons in ongoing conflicts. My experience with Sharon gives me credibility with these men that I wouldn't have otherwise. I can speak from personal experience about how manipulation works, how to document it, and how to protect yourself and your children from its effects. More importantly, I can offer them hope. I can show them that it's possible to build a strong, healthy family even after experiencing betrayal and deception, that the truth, however painful, is always better than living with lies. The work with the men's support group has been incredibly rewarding but also eye-opening. I've learned that our experience with Sharon, while extreme in some ways, was part of a much larger pattern of behavior that affects thousands of families every year. The men I work with tell similar stories. Women who moved fast to establish relationships, who isolated their partners from friends and family, who used children as leverage to maintain control. Women who lied about their pasts, their finances, sometimes even their identities. But I've also learned that the solution is always the same: truth, documentation, patience, and the courage to prioritize children's well-being over adult comfort. It's not easy work, and it doesn't always have happy endings, but it's necessary work. One of the men I mentor, a guy named Roy Henderson, was dealing with a situation almost identical to ours. His ex-wife had disappeared with their 2 children after he discovered she'd been living under a false name. When he found her, she was already married to someone else and claiming the children belonged to her new husband. Roy had given up hope until he heard our story. With encouragement and practical advice from our group, he hired an investigator, gathered evidence, and fought for his children in court. It took 2 years, but he eventually gained custody and his ex-wife was prosecuted for kidnapping and fraud. The day Roy's case was resolved, he called me in tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief and gratitude. His children were home, safe, and beginning the process of healing from their mother's manipulation. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was the beginning of their recovery. Stories like Roy's remind me why it was so important that Tony knocked on my door that day. If he'd given up, if he'd decided it wasn't worth disrupting Eddie's life, Sharon would have continued her manipulation indefinitely. Eddie would have grown up believing lies about himself. Nancy would have been raised by a woman who saw children as tools rather than people, and Danny would have remained trapped in a relationship built on deception. Instead, Tony's courage to seek the truth set in motion a chain of events that not only saved our family but equipped us to help others. Sometimes the hardest decisions we make are the ones that benefit people we haven't even met yet. The ripple effects of our experience continue to expand. Linda has incorporated lessons about healthy relationships into her curriculum, teaching young people how to recognize manipulation and build authentic connections with others. She often tells her students about our family's experience, not in detail, but as an example of how truth and honesty can triumph over lies and control. Eddie has become something of an advocate on his college campus, speaking to groups about the importance of authenticity and the dangers of performative relationships. His engineering background gives him a unique perspective on these issues. He talks about how relationships, like structures, need to be built on solid foundations if they're going to withstand the pressures they'll inevitably face. Nancy's art has evolved to explore themes of truth, deception, and family dynamics. Her work is powerful because it comes from genuine experience rather than academic theory. She understands, in a way that many young artists don't, how manipulation works and what authentic relationships look like in contrast. But perhaps the most significant ongoing effect of our experience is how it's shaped our family's approach to new relationships and challenges. We're not paranoid or distrustful, but we're informed. We know what red flags to look for. We understand the difference between healthy boundaries and manipulative control. When Nancy started dating, for example, we didn't hover or interrogate every boy who showed interest in her. But we did make sure she understood what healthy relationships looked like, and we made it clear that she could always come to us if something felt wrong. Her first serious boyfriend was a young man named Billy Thompson, a classmate who shared her interest in art. What impressed me about Billy wasn't his artistic talent or his good grades, but his response when Nancy told him about our family's history with Sharon. Instead of being put off or uncomfortable, Billy was genuinely interested in understanding how that experience had shaped Nancy and our family. He asked thoughtful questions, expressed appropriate sympathy for what we'd been through, and made it clear that he valued Nancy's insights about relationships and manipulation. Most importantly, Billy never tried to isolate Nancy from her family or make her choose between her relationship with him and her relationships with us. He understood that Nancy's strong family connections were part of what made her who she was, not obstacles to their relationship. It was exactly the response we hoped for, and it confirmed that Nancy had internalized the lessons of our experience. She'd chosen someone who valued honesty and authenticity, someone who enhanced her existing relationships rather than threatening them. The contrast with how Sharon had approached her relationship with Danny couldn't have been more stark. Where Sharon had worked to separate Danny from his family, Billy worked to understand and appreciate Nancy's family connections. Where Sharon had demanded to be the center of Danny's universe, Billy was content to be an important part of Nancy's world without needing to control it entirely. It's been 10 years now since Sharon left our lives, and sometimes I can barely remember what it felt like to live under her influence. The constant anxiety, the walking on eggshells, the sense that something was always slightly wrong, but you couldn't put your finger on what it was. What I remember clearly is the relief when the truth finally came out. Not just relief at being vindicated, but relief at finally being able to trust my own perceptions again. Sharon's gaslighting had been so effective that I'd started to doubt my own judgment about family relationships. The recovery from that kind of psychological manipulation takes time. It's not enough to expose the lies and remove the manipulator. You have to rebuild your confidence in your own ability to recognize truth and deception. You have to learn to trust your instincts again. That process was helped enormously by having Tony as a witness to what had happened. He understood Sharon's manipulation tactics because he'd experienced them himself. He could validate my memories and perceptions in a way that was crucial for my recovery. Danny went through a similar process, but his recovery was complicated by the guilt he felt about how he'd treated me during Sharon's manipulation. He'd chosen her over me repeatedly, and even though I understood that he'd been the victim of sophisticated psychological manipulation, he struggled to forgive himself. It took several sessions with a family therapist before Danny could accept that his choices during that period weren't a reflection of his character, but of Sharon's skill at manipulation. The therapist explained that people like Sharon specifically target individuals who are trusting and loyal, because those qualities make them more susceptible to manipulation. Understanding that his good qualities had been weaponized against him, rather than being evidence of weakness or stupidity, was crucial for Danny's recovery. He learned to see himself as a survivor rather than a fool, and that shift in perspective allowed him to rebuild his confidence in his relationships. The therapy sessions also helped all of us understand the long-term effects of living with a manipulator. Even after Sharon was gone, we continued to second-guess ourselves, to look for hidden meanings in innocent conversations, to expect the other shoe to drop in every positive situation. Learning to trust again, to take people at face value, to believe that good things could happen without ulterior motives, was a process that took years. But it was worth the effort, because it allowed us to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than defensive skepticism. One of the most important lessons we learned was that healing from manipulation requires both individual work and family work. We each had to process our own experience and rebuild our own confidence, but we also had to learn to function as a healthy family unit. That meant establishing new patterns of communication, new ways of making decisions, new traditions that reflected our authentic values rather than Sharon's artificial performance standards. It meant learning to disagree without assuming malicious intent, to support each other without enabling unhealthy behaviors, to celebrate successes without looking for hidden catches. The Sunday dinners that had been so painful during Sharon's manipulation became a symbol of our recovery. During her time with us, those dinners had been performances, carefully orchestrated events where everyone played their assigned roles. Now they were genuine celebrations of our connection to each other. The conversations were real, sometimes messy, always honest. We talked about work and school and relationships and dreams and fears. We disagreed about politics and debated the merits of different restaurants and argued about whose turn it was to do dishes. It was normal, healthy family chaos, the kind that Sharon had never allowed because it didn't fit her narrative of perfect family harmony. Eddie recently brought his girlfriend home for Sunday dinner, a young woman named Carol Wilson who's studying environmental science at his college. Watching how our family welcomed her, how natural and unforced the conversation was, how comfortable everyone seemed, I was struck by how different this was from the way Sharon had been integrated into our family. There was no performance, no careful management of impressions, no strategic positioning for advantage. Carol was just herself, and we were just ourselves, and somehow that was enough. More than enough, actually. It was exactly what a family gathering should be. Carol later told Eddie that she'd never seen a family that was so genuinely comfortable with each other. Her own family, while loving, had never learned to communicate as openly as we do. She said our Sunday dinners made her understand what she wanted to create in her own future family. That comment made me realize something important. Our experience with Sharon, as painful as it was, had taught us skills that many families never develop. We knew how to recognize manipulation, how to communicate honestly even when it was uncomfortable, how to maintain individual identity within a family structure, how to build trust gradually and carefully. These weren't skills we would have chosen to learn, but having learned them, we could appreciate their value. We were better equipped than most families to handle conflict, to weather challenges, to build lasting relationships based on mutual respect rather than convenience or habit. The men I work with in the support group often ask me how I knew to trust Tony when he first approached me. It's a good question because on the surface, his story was so outlandish that it could easily have been dismissed as the delusion of an unstable person. The answer is that I didn't know to trust him initially. What I knew was that something was wrong with my family situation, and that I needed to investigate rather than simply accept Sharon's explanations. Tony's story provided a framework for understanding what I'd been sensing but couldn't articulate. More importantly, Tony came with evidence. DNA results, investigative reports, documentation of Sharon's previous marriages. He wasn't asking me to take his word for anything. He was presenting facts and letting me draw my own conclusions. That's always been my advice to the men in the support group. Trust but verify. Listen to your instincts but gather evidence. Don't accept explanations that don't make sense but don't act on suspicions alone. Build a case based on facts, not emotions. It's advice that applies to all relationships, not just potentially manipulative ones. Healthy relationships can withstand scrutiny. In fact, they get stronger when both parties know they're dealing with honest, authentic people. Sharon couldn't withstand scrutiny, which is why she worked so hard to prevent it. She discouraged questions, deflected investigations, and isolated her targets from anyone who might provide alternative perspectives. The moment we started looking closely at her claims, her entire facade began to crumble. The contrast with Linda couldn't be more stark. Linda encourages questions, welcomes transparency, and actively works to maintain our family's connections with extended family and friends. She has nothing to hide because she's built her life on authentic foundations. That authenticity is what makes our family strong now. We're not perfect. We still have disagreements and challenges and moments of doubt, but we face them together honestly, without hidden agendas or ulterior motives. Last week, Eddie called to tell me that he'd been offered a job after graduation with a prestigious engineering firm in another state. It's an incredible opportunity, the kind of career launch that most young engineers can only dream of. But he was torn because it would mean moving away from our family. 10 years ago, during Sharon's time with us, a decision like this would have been fraught with manipulation and guilt. Sharon would have found a way to make Eddie's choice about her needs rather than his future. She would have used emotional manipulation to influence his decision regardless of what was best for him. Instead, our family approached Eddie's dilemma the way healthy families should. We listened to his concerns, helped him think through the pros and cons, and made it clear that we would support whatever decision he made. We talked about practical things like visits and communication, but we also acknowledged the emotional difficulty of being far from family. In the end, Eddie decided to take the job, not because we pushed him toward it or away from it, but because he concluded it was the right choice for his career and his future. He knew our support was unconditional, which gave him the freedom to make the decision based on his own needs rather than our expectations. The contrast with how Sharon would have handled this situation was stark. Where she would have made it about herself, we made it about Eddie. Where she would have used guilt and manipulation, we offered love and support. Where she would have seen his success as a threat to her control, we saw it as evidence of the strong foundation we'd helped him build. Nancy's reaction to her brother's news was equally telling. She was sad about the prospect of him moving away, but she was also proud of his achievement and excited about his future. There was no jealousy, no attempt to undermine his decision, no manipulation disguised as concern. These responses aren't accidental. They're the result of years of conscious effort to build a family culture based on honesty, support, and genuine love rather than control and manipulation. It's the kind of culture that Sharon could never have created because it requires authentic relationships rather than performative ones. As I write these final words, I'm sitting in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, waiting for the family to arrive for our weekly dinner. Danny and Linda will be here soon with updates about their retirement planning. Nancy will come with stories from her freshman year of college and pictures of her latest art projects. Tony will arrive with his girlfriend Susan, who's becoming a natural part of our extended family. Eddie will join us by video call from his new apartment across the country. It's not the family I imagined when I planned that disastrous 58th birthday party so many years ago. It's more complicated, less conventional, built from the pieces of what Sharon tried to destroy. But it's also stronger, more honest, and more resilient than anything she could have created through her manipulation and lies. The table is set for 7 again, just like it was that night when no one came. But this time I know everyone will be here. not because they're obligated or manipulated or guilted into attendance, but because they choose to be here, because this is where they belong, because this is what family really looks like when it's built on truth instead of deception. I think about Sharon sometimes not with anger, but with a kind of sad gratitude. She tried to destroy our family, but she actually saved it. She forced us to confront uncomfortable truths, to question easy assumptions, to build something real from the ruins of something fake. Her betrayal was cruel and calculated, but our response was a choice. We could have let her poison us against trust, against love, against the possibility of authentic relationships. Instead, we chose to learn from the experience and use that knowledge to build something better. The doorbell rings, and I can hear Danny's key in the lock, Nancy's laughter, the sound of family gathering, real family, chosen family. Family that knows the difference between love and control, between support and manipulation, between truth and performance. When I turned 58, I threw a party for the family and no one came. That same day, my daughter-in-law posted photos of everyone on a cruise. I just smiled. When they came back, I handed her a DNA test that made her go pale. That DNA test changed everything. Not just because it exposed Sharon's lies about Eddie's parentage, but because it forced us to examine every assumption we'd made about family, love, and trust. It shattered the illusion Sharon had created and gave us the opportunity to build something real in its place. Now, 10 years later, I can say with complete certainty that it was worth it. Every moment of pain, every difficult conversation, every legal battle, every sleepless night worrying about the children. It was all worth it to get to where we are now, because where we are now is home, real home. The kind of place where people show up not because they have to, but because they want to, where love is freely given and freely received. Where truth matters more than appearance and authenticity matters more than performance. Sharon thought she could control our story, manipulate our relationships, and define our family on her terms. But she was wrong. Family isn't something that can be controlled or manufactured. It's something that grows from honesty, commitment, and the daily choice to show up for each other no matter what. That's the lesson of our story. Not that betrayal is inevitable, or that people can't be trusted, but that truth is stronger than lies, love is stronger than manipulation, and family is stronger than the people who try to destroy it. Every single day, it's worth it. Sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the greatest victories, not because pain is good, but because truth always builds stronger foundations than lies ever could. Real family isn't about perfect people making perfect choices, but about imperfect people choosing to love each other with honesty, courage, and unwavering commitment to what's right.